The morning Harlan Becker found the forged documents nailed to his vineyard gate. He was carrying 2 cups of mint tea and humming an old harvest song his father used to sing when the grapes were heavy on the vine. He stopped mid-step, steam curling into the cool autumn air, and stared at the parchment fluttering against the weathered wood. The official seal stamped at the bottom caught the early light, all crimson wax and elaborate scrollwork, and even from 3 paces away he could read the accusations written in a clerk's careful hand. Theft of property, sabotage of wine stores, destruction of equipment. And at the center of every charge, one name: Sera Brecken, orc laborer employed at Becker Vineyards. For a long moment Harlan simply stood there, the tea growing tepid in his hands, while his mind tried to catch up with what his eyes were seeing. Then the heat started in his chest, that familiar burn that his mother had always warned him about. The Becker temper that had gotten his grandfather thrown out of the Merchants' Guild and his father into 3 separate fistfights over disputed property lines. He tore the document down with enough force to splinter the nail, tucked both cups of tea under one arm, and stalked toward the main house where Sera would be finishing the morning vine inspection. She was exactly where he expected, kneeling beside the row of vines nearest the eastern slope, her strong hands gentle as she examined clusters of grapes for rot or pest damage. The morning sun caught the green of her skin, turned it almost luminous, and highlighted the dark braid that fell over one shoulder. She looked up when she heard his boots crunching through the fallen leaves, and her expression shifted from concentration to concern when she saw his face. "Harlan." "What is wrong?" He thrust the parchment toward her, words tumbling out faster than he could properly organize them. "Someone nailed this to the gate. It is garbage, complete fabricated garbage, but it has an official seal and your name all through it. And I need you to tell me who would do this, because I am about 10 seconds from riding into town and punching the magistrate in his lying mouth." Sera took the document carefully, her tusks catching her lower lip as she read. The small gesture was one he had come to know well over the past year, ever since she had appeared at his door asking for work, and he had taken one look at her calloused hands and direct gaze and hired her on the spot. It meant she was thinking, processing, trying to find the logical thread in something that made no sense. "This seal," she said slowly, "is from the Regional Trade Commission. These are serious charges, Harlan. If they believed them true, they would have sent guards to arrest me, not simply posted notice." "Exactly." Harlan forced himself to breathe, to think past the anger, which means someone wants it to look official without actually involving the authorities. Someone who knows you are innocent but wants to make it seem otherwise. Sera stood, still holding the parchment, and handed it back to him with careful precision. Her eyes, dark and clear, met his without flinching. "I have stolen nothing. I have sabotaged nothing. Every barrel in your cellar, every tool in your workshop, every vine in these fields I have tended as if they were my own. I know." The words came out rough, almost angry, though the anger was not for her. "Sera, I know. You think I would believe this nonsense for even a heartbeat. You have worked harder than anyone I have ever employed, and half the reason this year's vintage is going to be spectacular is because you noticed the blight on the north slope before it could spread." Something softened in her expression, just slightly, but she still looked troubled. "Then why forge such documents? What purpose does it serve?" That was the question that made Harlan's stomach twist, because he could think of several answers and none of them were good. He glanced back toward the gate, toward the road that led to town and to the neighboring properties, and felt his mind start to turn over possibilities like stones in a riverbed. "Whoever did this wants one of 2 things," he said slowly. "Either they want to drive you away from my employment, or they want to damage my reputation by association. Perhaps both. Sera folded her arms across her chest, her work shirt pulling tight across her shoulders. She was not a large woman by Orc standards, Harlan had learned, though she was tall and strong in a way that spoke of years of physical labor. When she had first arrived, she had been wary, defensive, prepared for the prejudice that followed her people like a shadow. But he had never cared about that, had only cared that she knew her way around growing things, and did not mind the long hours and hard work that vineyard life demanded. Now, watching her jaw set in that stubborn line he had come to recognize, he realized with sudden clarity that somewhere in the past year his feelings had shifted from respect to something considerably more complicated. "We need to determine who made these," Sera said, her voice steady despite the worry in her eyes. "And we need to do it carefully with proof. If we accuse the wrong person, it will only make things worse." Harlan wanted to argue, wanted to saddle his horse and ride to every neighboring vineyard until someone confessed, but he forced himself to nod. She was right. She was usually right, which was one of the many things he found both admirable and occasionally irritating about her. "All right," he said. "We do this smart. We find out who forged these documents, we expose them, and we make sure everyone knows you are innocent." "And you believe we can do this?" Sera asked quietly. "Humans will believe a human over an orc, Harlan. That is simply how the world works." "Then we make the evidence so clear they have no choice," Harlan said, and realized as he spoke that his earlier anger was crystallizing into something more useful, more focused. "Sera, I am not going to let someone destroy your name with lies, not while I am breathing." She looked at him for a long moment, something unreadable moving behind her eyes, and then nodded once. "Then we had best get started. May I see the document again?" They spread the parchment out on the work table in the main barn, using stones to hold down the corners, and studied it in the better light. The accusations were detailed and specific, listing dates and amounts, describing incidents that had supposedly occurred over the past 3 months. Wine barrels opened and left to spoil, tools broken and hidden, grapevines cut at the root. "None of this happened," Sera said flatly. "Our wine stores are intact, our tools are all accounted for, the vines are healthy." "I know. But whoever wrote this knew enough about vineyard operations to make it sound plausible." Harlan leaned closer, squinting at the handwriting. "This is not the magistrate's clerk. I have seen his writing 100 times, and he makes his letters differently, more compressed." "So someone hired a scribe to write it," Sera said, "or wrote it themselves and tried to mimic official language." Harlan's attention had caught on the seal at the bottom of the page, that elaborate stamp in red wax. He had seen the Trade Commission's seal before, had received legitimate correspondence from them regarding licensing and inspections. This one looked right at first glance, all the correct symbols and flourishes, but something about it nagged at him. "Wait," he said, and hurried to his office, returning a moment later with a letter he had received 2 months earlier regarding the upcoming regional wine judging. He laid it next to the forged document and pointed. "Look at the seals, side by side." Sera bent over the table, her braid falling forward, and he found himself momentarily distracted by the way the light caught the curve of her jaw before he forced his attention back to the documents. "The outer ring," Sera said slowly. "The pattern is different. See here, on the legitimate seal the grape cluster has 5 distinct bunches. On the forgery there are only 4. Harlan felt a grin spread across his face despite the seriousness of the situation. "That is it. That is the proof. Someone made a mold of the seal, but they did not get it quite right. The question is who has access to official seals and the skill to forge one. Or the money to pay someone who does," Sera added. She straightened, and he could see the wheels turning in her mind. Who would benefit from having me dismissed from your employment? Or from damaging your reputation before the regional judging? The answer came to him in a cold rush, and he wondered why he had not seen it immediately. Garrett Marston. Sera's eyes narrowed. Your competitor. My rival, Harlan corrected, and the bitterness in his voice surprised him. Marston Vineyards is the second largest operation in the region, and Garrett has made it very clear that he intends to be first. He has been trying to buy my land for 3 years, and every time I refuse, he gets more aggressive. Has he made threats? Nothing direct. But last spring, 2 of my workers left suddenly to take positions with him at twice the wage. And during the harvest festival, he made comments about how unfortunate it would be if something were to damage my wine before the judging. Sera was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the forged document without quite touching it. Garrett Marston, she said finally. I have seen him. He came to your gate once when you were in town. He asked me questions about the vineyard, about the harvest projections. He seemed very interested in our operations. And he has never made a secret of his opinions about orcs, Harlan added, the anger sparking again in his chest. He called you a creature the one time I was foolish enough to introduce you at a guild meeting. I remember. Sera's voice was calm, but he caught the slight tightening around her eyes. You nearly hit him. I should have hit him, would have saved us some trouble now. Harlan forced himself to breathe slowly, to think instead of react. But if Garrett forged these documents, we need proof. Real proof, not just suspicion. The Trade Commission will not take action based on our word alone, especially not against someone from an established family. Then we need to determine how he obtained the seal, or who forged it for him, Sera said. If he hired someone, there will be a trail. Money changing hands, meetings, correspondence. Harlan nodded slowly, his mind already working through the possibilities. Garrett was not a careful man, not in the way he needed to be for this kind of deception. He was arrogant, used to getting his way through money and influence, and that kind of arrogance led to mistakes. The regional judging is in 3 weeks, Harlan said. If Garrett wanted to damage my reputation, he would want these accusations circulating before then, poisoning opinions. Which means he will likely try to spread copies of this document, maybe even bring it up at the guild meeting next week. So we have 1 week to prove the forgery and identify him as the source, Sera said. She met his eyes and he saw determination there, hard and clear. How do we begin? We start by making inquiries. Quietly, I have friends in town, people who owe me favors. Someone will have seen something, heard something, and we need to examine that seal more closely, see if we can determine exactly how it was made. They worked through the morning, Harlan sending carefully worded messages to contacts in the nearby town, while Sera continued her inspection of the vineyards, maintaining the appearance that nothing was wrong. He caught himself watching her as she moved between the rows of vines, her movements efficient and sure, and realized with a strange mixture of fear and exhilaration that the thought of losing her was unbearable in ways that had nothing to do with her skills as a laborer. He had fallen for her, probably months ago, though he had been too focused on the work and too wary of making her uncomfortable to examine his own feelings too closely. Now, faced with someone trying to drive her away, the truth of it hit him like a blow to the chest. By afternoon, one of his messages had borne fruit. Thomas Wheeler, who ran the printing shop in town and occasionally did engraving work for official documents, sent back a note saying he had information but would only speak in person. Harlan saddled his horse and was halfway down the drive when Sera appeared from the equipment shed, wiping her hands on a rag. You are going to town. Thomas Wheeler wants to talk. He does seal work sometimes, might have seen something. Sera hesitated, then said, "I should come with you." Harlan almost refused automatically, protective instinct rising, but caught himself. She had as much right to pursue this as he did, more even, since her name was the one being slandered. "All right. Saddle Daisy. She is the gentler of the two." They rode into town side by side, and Harlan was acutely aware of the stares they drew. A human man and an orc woman together was still uncommon enough to attract attention, especially in a rural area where old prejudices died hard. He kept his expression pleasant and neutral, nodding to people he knew, refusing to act as if there was anything unusual about their partnership. Thomas Wheeler's shop was tucked down a side street, the windows displaying samples of his printing work and a few examples of official seals and stamps. The bell above the door chimed as they entered, and Thomas emerged from the back room, wiping ink from his fingers. He was a thin man in his 50s, with sharp eyes and a perpetually worried expression. "Harlan," he said, nodding in greeting. Then his gaze shifted to Sera, and his expression grew more cautious. "Miss Brecken, Thomas, thank you for agreeing to speak with us." Harlan pulled the forged document from his satchel and laid it on the counter. "I need your expertise on this seal. Is it legitimate?" Thomas pulled a magnifying glass from his apron pocket and bent over the document, studying the seal with professional intensity. After a long moment, he straightened and shook his head. "It is a good forgery, I will give them that. But no, it is not legitimate. See here, the wax itself is slightly wrong color, a shade too bright. And the impression is shallow in places, which suggests it was made from a mold rather than an original stamp." "Can you tell who made it?" Sera asked. Thomas hesitated, and Harlan could see the conflict on his face. "I did not make it, if that is what you are asking. But I may know who did." "Thomas, please. This document is full of lies about Sera, and whoever forged it is trying to destroy both our reputations. If you know something, I need you to tell me." Thomas glanced toward the window, as if checking to make sure they were not being observed, then sighed. "About a month ago, Garrett Marston came to see me. He wanted to know if I could make a replica of the Trade Commission seal. Said it was for a theatrical production his sister was organizing, something about a play set in a magistrate's office." Harlan felt cold certainty settle in his gut. "And did you make it for him?" "I refused. Making unauthorized copies of official seals is illegal, and I am not about to risk my license for Garrett Marston's theater games." Thomas tapped the document with one finger. "But he left angry, and I heard later that week that he had traveled to Kelbrook, the next town over. There is a man there, Marcus Flint, who does engraving work and is not particularly concerned about legality if the price is right." "Marcus Flint," Harlan repeated, committing the name to memory. "And you think Garrett went to him?" "I cannot prove it. But Marcus has a reputation and Garrett has money. It would make sense." Sera had been quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up. "Would Marcus Flint keep records of his work? Something that would prove Garrett commissioned the seal?" Thomas shrugged. "Marcus is not the most organized individual, but if you offered him enough money, he might be persuaded to admit who hired him. The man has no loyalty beyond his own pocket." Harlan extended his hand across the counter. "Thank you, Thomas. This helps more than you know." Thomas gripped his hand firmly, then surprised Harlan by turning to Sera. "Miss Brecken, for what it is worth, I have heard nothing but good things about your work at Becker Vineyards. Anyone with sense knows those accusations are nonsense." Sera's expression softened slightly. "Thank you. That means more than you might think." They left the shop and stood in the street for a moment, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders. Harlan could feel the pieces starting to come together, but they were not there yet, not quite. They had a theory and a likely suspect, but they needed proof that would hold up before the Trade Commission and the Guild. "Kelbrook is half a day's ride," he said, thinking aloud. "We could go tomorrow, speak with this Marcus Flint, see what he remembers." "And if he refuses to talk?" Sera asked. "Then we find another way. But Thomas is right. Men like Flint can usually be persuaded if you approach them correctly." Harlan glanced at her, saw the worry still lingering in her eyes, and acted on impulse, reaching out to take her hand. Her skin was warm beneath his palm, her fingers strong and calloused from work. "Sera, we are going to fix this. I promise you." She looked down at their joined hands, and for a moment he thought he had overstepped, that she would pull away. But instead, she squeezed his fingers gently and met his eyes. "Why are you doing this, Harlan? You could simply dismiss me, distance yourself from the accusations. It would be easier for you." The question caught him off guard, even though he supposed he should have expected it. He had never been particularly good at hiding his feelings, wore his heart plainly for anyone who cared to look. But saying it aloud, admitting the truth, felt like stepping off a cliff into unknown territory. "Because you matter to me," he said finally, the words coming out rougher than he intended. "Not just as an employee, though you are the best worker I have ever had. You matter to me as a person, Sera. These past months, working beside you, talking with you, I have come to care about you more than I probably should. And the thought of someone hurting you with lies, driving you away, that is not something I can tolerate." Sera was very still, her dark eyes searching his face. "Harlan, I am an orc. You are human. There are people who would see us as enemies simply for existing. I know. And I do not care." He said it simply, stating a fact. "I am not going to pretend my feelings do not exist because some people are too narrow-minded to see past your skin. You are smart and kind, and you laugh at my terrible jokes, and you saved the North Slope vines, and somewhere along the way I fell for you. If that makes things complicated, well, things were already complicated the moment someone decided to forge documents about you." She was quiet for so long that Harlan started to worry he had ruined everything, that his honesty had been too much too soon. But then she smiled, just a small curve of her lips, and squeezed his hand again. "You are a very strange man, Harlan Becker. But I find I do not mind strange as much as I once thought I would." Relief flooded through him, warm and dizzying, and he found himself grinning like a fool in the middle of the street. "So you will not throw me out on my ear for being too forward?" "Not today," she said, and there was amusement in her voice now, cutting through the worry. "But perhaps we should focus on clearing my name before we complicate matters further." "Practical as always," Harlan said, but he did not let go of her hand as they walked back to where their horses were tied. "We ride for Kelbrook tomorrow at dawn." "Agreed, agreed." They rode back to the vineyard as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Harlan spent the evening reviewing everything they knew, making notes, trying to anticipate what Marcus Flint might say or how Garrett Marston might react if cornered. Sera worked in the cellars, checking the wine barrels and making sure everything was properly stored and sealed. And when she finally climbed the stairs to her small room above the barn, Harlan found himself standing at his window, watching the light from her lamp glow softly in the darkness. They left at first light, riding east through country that grew increasingly hilly and forested as they left the vineyard region behind. Sera rode well, comfortable in the saddle, and they talked as they traveled about everything and nothing. She told him stories about growing up in an orc settlement far to the north, about learning to tend crops from her mother and how to track game from her father. He told her about inheriting the vineyard from his uncle, about the early years when he had barely known which end of a vine to prune, and had learned mostly through expensive mistakes. You never married, Sera said at one point, the question implicit in the statement. Never found the right person, Harlan said honestly. Came close once when I was younger. A merchant's daughter from town, but she wanted to live in the city, have a house with servants and a social calendar, and I wanted to make wine and work with my hands. We realized fairly quickly we wanted different lives. And you do not regret choosing the vineyard, not for a moment. He glanced at her, saw the sunlight catching in her dark hair. What about you? Anyone waiting for you back north? Sera shook her head. I left home 3 years ago, looking for work and a place where I could make my own way. There was a man once briefly, but he wanted me to stay in the settlement, marry him, have children, follow the traditional path. I wanted more than that, or perhaps just something different. So we are both stubborn and independent, Harlan said, smiling. This should be interesting. If we survive the next few weeks, Sera replied, but there was warmth in her voice. Kelbrook was smaller than their own town, a collection of buildings clustered around a central square with a market and a few shops. They found Marcus Flint's workshop easily enough, following directions from a woman selling bread at the market. The building was run down, the sign faded, and when they knocked, it took several tries before the door opened. Marcus Flint was a heavy-set man with ink-stained fingers and the watery eyes of someone who spent too much time squinting at fine detail work. He looked them over with obvious suspicion, his gaze lingering on Sera in a way that made Harlan's jaw tighten. "We are not looking to buy," Harlan said before Flint could speak. "We are here to ask about a commission you may have completed recently, a replica seal for the Regional Trade Commission." Flint's expression shuddered immediately. "I do not discuss my clients or my work, even when that work was used to forge legal documents." Harlan kept his voice level with effort. "Someone used a seal you made to create false accusations against an innocent person. If you cooperated in that knowingly, you are complicit in fraud. I have no idea what you are talking about." Flint started to close the door, but Harlan put his boot in the gap. "Garrett Marston. He came to you about a month ago, wanted you to make a replica of the Trade Commission seal." "We already know this happened, we just need you to confirm it." Flint's eyes darted between them, calculating. "And why would I do that? Marston paid well, and I have no interest in making enemies of wealthy men." Harlan had anticipated this, had come prepared. He pulled a small purse from his belt and held it up. "Because I am willing to pay better. And because if these accusations stand, they will destroy not just Sera's reputation but mine as well, and I employ a dozen people who will lose their livelihoods. Is Garrett Marston's goodwill worth that?" Flint stared at the purse, his tongue darting out to wet his lips. Finally, he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in, quickly." The workshop was cluttered and smelled of ink and metal shavings. Flint led them to a back room where examples of his work were displayed, seals and stamps and engraved plates. He rummaged through a stack of papers on a desk and pulled out a sketch, showing it to them reluctantly. "Marston came to me 5 weeks ago. Wanted a replica of the Trade Commission seal. Said it was for a private matter and he would pay triple my usual rate if I kept it quiet. I made the seal from a wax impression he brought with him, carved the mold, and delivered it 3 days later. And you did not think this was suspicious?" Sera asked, her voice tight with controlled anger. Flint shrugged. "Not my business to question wealthy clients. He paid in full, I did the work. What he did with it after was his concern." "Except now it is your concern," Harlan said, "because that seal was used to forge legal documents. If this goes before a magistrate, you will be called to testify." "I did not know what he planned to do with it," Flint protested, but there was fear in his eyes now. "But you can testify that he commissioned it," Harlan pressed. You can confirm that Garrett Marston came to you specifically for a replica Trade Commission seal. That is all we need." Flint was silent for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. "If it comes to that, yes, I will testify. But I want assurance that I will not face charges myself. If you cooperate fully, I will speak to the authorities on your behalf," Harlan said. "You made a poor decision, but you are not the one who used the seal to commit fraud." "And I want the rest of that payment," Flint added, nodding toward the purse. Harlan handed it over, though it galled him to pay the man anything. "Write down exactly what happened, dates, amounts, everything. We will need a signed statement." Flint grumbled but complied, scrawling out a brief account of Garrett's commission on a scrap of parchment and signing his name at the bottom. Harlan tucked the document carefully into his satchel, along with the sketch of the seal design. "If Marston learns I spoke with you, he will make trouble for me," Flint said as they prepared to leave. "Then I suggest you practice your discretion," Harlan replied coldly. "Thank you for your cooperation." They left Kelbrook as the afternoon shadows began to lengthen, riding hard to make it back before full dark. Harlan felt the triumph of success, tempered by anger at the whole situation, at Garrett's arrogance and willingness to destroy someone's reputation for his own gain. "We have proof now," Sera said as they rode. "Flint's statement, the sketches, the differences in the seal, that should be enough to expose the forgery." "It should be," Harlan agreed, "but we need to be strategic about how we present it. If we simply accuse Garrett privately, he will deny everything and use his influence to bury it. We need to do this publicly where he cannot hide." "The guild meeting," Sera said. "You said it was next week." "Yes, but that is too soon. The regional wine judging is better. Larger audience, Trade Commission officials present, and Garrett will be there trying to win. If we expose him then in front of everyone, he cannot escape the consequences." Sera was quiet for a moment, then said, "That means living with these accusations for 3 more weeks." "People will talk, Harlan. They will believe the document. Let them talk." Harlan's voice was firm. "Anyone who knows us will know the accusations are false, and in 3 weeks we will prove it so decisively that there will be no room for doubt." They reached the vineyard as the last light faded from the sky, and Harlan insisted Sera join him for a late dinner in the main house rather than retreating to her room. They ate bread and cheese and cold chicken and talked about their strategy, about how to present the evidence, about what Garrett might say in his defense. "He will claim he needed the seal for legitimate purposes," Sera said, thinking aloud. "That we have misinterpreted his intentions. Which is why we need Flint's testimony about the circumstances of the commission, and we need to show that seal side by side with a legitimate one, demonstrate the flaws in the forgery." Harlan leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "We also need to be prepared for Garrett to attack us personally, to make this about our relationship rather than his fraud." Sera met his eyes across the table. "You are certain you want to do this publicly? Once you stand up for me in front of everyone, there will be no hiding the fact that you care for me. People will judge you." "Let them," Harlan said simply. "I am done hiding how I feel, Sera, and I am done allowing men like Garrett Marston to dictate who I care about or how I run my vineyard. He forged those documents because he wanted to drive a wedge between us, to force you out. The best way to defeat him is to show him that his plan failed, that we are stronger together than he anticipated." Sera's expression softened, and she reached across the table to take his hand. "You are either very brave or very foolish, Harlan Becker." "Probably both," he admitted, grinning. "But I have good instincts, and my instincts say you are worth fighting for." The next 3 weeks were a study in controlled patience, which went against every impulse in Harlan's nature. He wanted to confront Garrett immediately, to ride to Marston Vineyards and punch the man in his smug face. But he forced himself to wait, to focus on the work, to prepare their case meticulously. Word of the forged documents had spread, as Harlan had known it would. He received several visits from concerned neighbors, from guild members who asked carefully phrased questions about Sera's employment and whether there was any truth to the accusations. Each time, Harlan responded calmly and firmly, stating that the documents were forgeries, that Sera was innocent, and that the matter would be resolved at the regional judging. Some people believed him. Others clearly did not. Harlan gritted his teeth and maintained his composure, reminding himself that public vindication would be all the sweeter for the wait. Sera continued her work in the vineyards, though Harlan could see the strain in her face, the way she held herself more carefully, as if bracing for attack. He made a point of working beside her as much as possible, of treating her exactly as he always had, with respect and affection and easy partnership. If people were going to talk, he decided, they might as well give them something real to discuss. One evening, about a week before the judging, they were in the cellars sampling the wines that Harlan would be entering in the competition. The barrels were arranged in neat rows, each one labeled with the vintage year and grape variety, and the cool air smelled of oak and fermentation and the deep richness of aging wine. "This one," Sera said, holding up a glass of deep red wine to the lamplight. "This is your best. The balance is perfect, the tannins are smooth, the finish is long. This is the wine that will win." Harlan tasted his own sample and nodded. She was right, as usual. This particular vintage was exceptional, the result of good weather and careful tending and a bit of luck. "We will enter this as our primary. But I want to bring the dessert wine as well, the late harvest from the South Slope. That one is unique enough to stand out." "Agreed." Sera set down her glass and looked at him, her expression serious. "Harlan, what happens after the judging?" "Assuming we successfully expose Garrett, assuming we clear my name, what then?" "What do you mean? I mean us. You said you care for me, and I believe you. But caring and building a life together are different things. You are a landowner, a respected member of the guild. I am an orc laborer who has been publicly accused of crimes. Even if we prove my innocence, people will not forget." Harlan moved closer, setting down his own glass, and took both her hands in his. "Sera, I am not interested in hiding what I feel for you. I am not interested in a secret courtship or pretending you are just an employee. When I expose Garrett's forgery, I am going to make it very clear that you and I are partners, in the vineyard and in life. If people have a problem with that, they can take their business elsewhere. You would risk your reputation for me. My reputation means nothing if I cannot be honest about who I care for." He squeezed her hands gently. "I know this will not be easy. I know there will be people who disapprove, who make trouble, who say terrible things. But I would rather face that with you beside me than live comfortably alone." Sera was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "I never expected to find this. When I came here, I was just looking for work, for a place where I could be left alone to do my job. But you have given me so much more than that. You have given me respect and trust, and now apparently you are giving me your heart as well." "Is that a bad thing?" Harlan asked, smiling despite the seriousness of the moment. "No," Sera said softly. "It is terrifying and wonderful and completely unexpected. But no, it is not a bad thing." He kissed her then, there in the cool dimness of the wine cellar, and she kissed him back with a fervor that made his heart race. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Harlan rested his forehead against hers. "3 more weeks," he said. "We survive 3 more weeks, we expose Garrett, we clear your name, and then we figure out the rest. 3 more weeks, Sera agreed. The regional wine judging was held in the town of Millbrook, a prosperous settlement that served as the unofficial capital of the vineyard region. The judging itself took place in the great hall of the local guild house, a large stone building that had stood for 200 years and hosted countless competitions and ceremonies. Harlan and Sera arrived the morning of the event, bringing their wine samples carefully packed in a wagon along with all the documentation they had gathered. The forged document, Marcus Flint's signed statement, the sketch of the seal, and a legitimate trade commission letter with an authentic seal for comparison. The hall was already crowded with vintners and guild members, everyone dressed in their finest clothes, the air buzzing with competition and commerce. Harlan spotted Garrett Marston almost immediately, holding court near the judging table, surrounded by other prominent vineyard owners. Garrett was a tall man in his 40s, well-dressed and confident, with the kind of easy arrogance that came from a lifetime of privilege. When Garrett saw Harlan, his expression shifted to something smug and satisfied, and Harlan felt his temper flare. But he forced himself to smile pleasantly and nod, as if nothing was amiss. "Steady," Sera murmured beside him. She had dressed carefully for the occasion, in a simple but well-made dress that Harlan had bought for her in town, and she carried herself with quiet dignity despite the stares she attracted. The judging began, wines being presented and tasted and discussed with great seriousness by the panel of experts. Harlan's red vintage received high praise, and his dessert wine was noted as exceptional and unique. Garrett's entries were also well received, and as the morning progressed, it became clear that the competition for top honors would be between the two of them. Harlan waited until the judging was complete and the awards were about to be announced. Then, as the crowd settled into their seats and the Trade Commission official stepped forward to speak, Harlan rose from his place and raised his hand. "Excuse me, Commissioner. Before the awards are announced, there is a matter of fraud that must be addressed." The hall went silent, every head turning toward him. The commissioner, an older woman named Eleanor Thane, frowned. "What matter of fraud?" Harlan pulled the forged document from his satchel and held it up. "This document, bearing what appears to be an official trade commission seal, was posted at my vineyard gate 3 weeks ago. It contains false accusations against my employee, Sera Brecken, claiming theft and sabotage. However, the seal is a forgery, and I have evidence proving who commissioned its creation." The crowd erupted in murmurs and exclamations. Garrett Marston had gone very still, his expression frozen in a parody of surprise. Commissioner Thane gestured sharply for silence. "That is a serious accusation, Master Becker. Do you have proof?" "I do." Harlan walked forward, Sera beside him, and laid out the documents on the table before the commissioner. "Here is the forged document. Here is a legitimate letter from the Trade Commission with an authentic seal. You will note that the seals are similar but not identical. The forgery is flawed in several ways, most notably in the grape cluster pattern on the outer ring." Commissioner Thane bent over the documents, pulling out a magnifying glass to examine the seals closely. After a long moment, she straightened, her expression grim. "You are correct. This seal is not authentic. Who do you claim created it?" "The seal was forged by Marcus Flint of Kelbrook, on commission from Garrett Marston of Marston Vineyards." Harlan placed Flint's signed statement on the table. "This is Master Flint's written testimony, confirming that Garrett Marston came to him 5 weeks ago requesting a replica Trade Commission seal, which Flint created and delivered." The hall erupted again, louder this time, and Garrett surged to his feet. "This is ridiculous. I commissioned no such thing. This is a desperate attempt by Becker to salvage his failing reputation. Then explain how the forged seal came to exist, Harlan said, his voice cutting through the noise. Explain how a document bearing that seal came to be posted at my vineyard, containing detailed accusations against Sera. Explain why Marcus Flint would lie about your commission. Flint is a criminal and a liar. He would say anything for money. Garrett's face had flushed red with anger. And frankly, the accusations in that document may be false, but that does not change the fact that you employ an orc, that you fraternize with her in ways that are wholly inappropriate. Inappropriate according to whom? Harlan's voice was cold, steady, and he felt Sera's hand brush against his in silent support. According to you, Garrett, according to your narrow-minded prejudices, Sera Brecken is the finest vineyard worker I have ever employed. She is skilled, honest, and hardworking. The accusations in your forged document are lies, every single one of them. My forged document. You have no proof I commissioned anything. I have Flint's testimony. I have the timing of the commission matching when you visited Thomas Wheeler seeking the same work and were refused. I have your well-known attempts to purchase my land and your equally well-known prejudice against orcs. Harlan stepped closer to the judging table, addressing the commissioner and the assembled crowd rather than Garrett. Garrett Marston wanted to damage my reputation and drive away my best worker. He forged official documents to do so, which is a crime. And he did it because he cannot compete fairly, cannot win based on the quality of his wine alone. Commissioner Thane held up a hand for silence, her expression severe. These are very serious accusations, and they will require a full investigation. Master Marston, do you deny commissioning the replica seal from Marcus Flint? Completely, Garrett said, but there was sweat on his brow now, and his voice had lost some of its certainty. Then you will not object to us summoning Master Flint to testify before the guild tribunal. Garrett opened his mouth, closed it, and seemed to realize he was trapped. If he objected, it would look like an admission of guilt. If he allowed the testimony, Flint would confirm the commission. I have nothing to hide, Garrett said finally, but the words sounded hollow. Commissioner Thane nodded slowly. Very well. This matter will be referred to the guild tribunal for formal investigation. In the meantime, Master Becker, your evidence appears credible, and I will be issuing a statement that the accusations against Miss Brecken are unfounded and appear to be the result of forgery. Relief flooded through Harlan, so intense it made him dizzy. Beside him, Sera let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. But Harlan was not done. He had one more thing to do, one more statement to make. He turned to face the assembled crowd, very aware that every eye was on him, and reached out to take Sera's hand openly, publicly, in front of everyone. I want to make something clear, he said, his voice carrying through the hall. Sera Brecken is not just my employee. She is my partner in the vineyard and in life. I care for her deeply, and I will not hide that or apologize for it. If anyone has a problem with that, they are welcome to say so now. The hall was silent, stunned. Harlan could see shock on faces, disapproval on others, but also, surprisingly, a few expressions of approval and even admiration. He did not care about any of it. He only cared about Sera, standing beside him with her head held high, and the truth of his feelings. Then, before he could second-guess himself, before the moment could slip away, he turned to Sera and kissed her. It was not a chaste kiss, not a polite brush of lips. It was a real kiss, full of feeling and passion and everything he had been holding back for months. Sera stiffened in surprise for just a heartbeat, and then she kissed him back, her arms coming up to wrap around his neck, and the hall erupted in a mixture of gasps and applause and scandalized exclamations. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Harlan looked into Sera's eyes and saw joy there, bright and unmistakable. "Was that too much?" he asked quietly for her alone. "It was perfect," she said, smiling. "You are absolutely insane, but it was perfect." Commissioner Thane cleared her throat loudly, drawing their attention back to the front of the hall. She looked faintly amused despite the seriousness of the situation. "While I appreciate the dramatic timing, Master Becker, we still have awards to announce. If you would kindly take your seats." The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. Harlan's red vintage won Best in category, and his dessert wine received a special commendation for innovation. Garrett's wines received no awards at all, and by the time the ceremony concluded, he had vanished from the hall, fleeing before the full weight of public disapproval could land on him. People came up to congratulate Harlan, though the congratulations were mixed with curious glances at Sera and carefully worded questions about their relationship. Harlan answered each one the same way, simply and honestly. Yes, he and Sera were together. Yes, he was aware of the challenges that would bring. No, he did not care what people thought. By the time they left Millbrook that evening, wagon loaded with awards and wine bottles, Harlan felt lighter than he had in weeks. The sky was clear and full of stars, and Sera sat beside him on the wagon seat, her shoulder pressed against his. "The tribunal will find Garrett guilty," she said quietly. "Flint will testify and Garrett has no defense. Yes, he will face fines, probably lose his guild standing. His reputation is destroyed." Harlan glanced at her. "Does that bother you?" "No. He tried to destroy me first, and for no reason other than prejudice and greed. He deserves whatever consequences come." They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of the horses hooved steady on the road. Then Sera said, "You kissed me in front of everyone." "I did," Harlan agreed. "I have been wanting to do that for months, seemed like the right moment." "You made us the subject of gossip for years to come." "Probably," he grinned. "But at least it will be interesting gossip." Sera laughed, the sound warm and free, and Harlan felt his heart swell with affection and relief and pure happiness. They had survived the trial, exposed the villain, and come out stronger for it. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The tribunal hearing was held 2 weeks later and went exactly as predicted. Marcus Flint testified about Garrett's commission, providing dates and details that matched the timeline perfectly. Garrett's lawyers tried to discredit Flint's testimony, arguing that he was unreliable and had been paid by Harlan to lie, but Commissioner Thane was not swayed. The evidence was too clear, too damning. Garrett Marston was found guilty of forgery and fraud. He was fined heavily, stripped of his guild membership, and barred from participating in any regional trade activities for 5 years. His reputation, built on generations of family wealth and influence, lay in ruins. Harlan felt no particular satisfaction in Garrett's downfall, only relief that justice had been served, and Sera's name had been fully cleared. The guild issued a formal apology to Sera, and Commissioner Thane made a point of meeting with her privately to express regret that the accusations had ever been allowed to circulate. Life at the vineyard returned to normal, or rather, to a new normal. Harlan and Sera continued their work side by side, but now there was no hiding the nature of their relationship. They ate meals together, spent evenings talking and planning for the future, and when Harlan held her hand or kissed her in the middle of the vineyard, it felt natural and right. Some of the neighboring vintners remained disapproving, refusing to speak to Harlan at guild meetings or avoiding his business. But others, to his surprise, were supportive or at least neutral. Thomas Wheeler made a point of stopping by the vineyard to congratulate them, and offer his services for any future printing needs. Several other guild members followed suit, and Harlan realized that by standing up publicly for what he believed, he had earned a different kind of respect. The harvest came on schedule, rich and abundant, and Harlan and Sera worked through the long days of picking and pressing with the help of the seasonal laborers they hired each year. On the first day of the crush, when the grapes were brought to the press and the juice began to flow, Harlan stood back and watched Sera organizing the workers, her voice clear and confident, her movements efficient and sure. She had become the unofficial foreman of the operation, the person everyone turned to when they had questions or problems. She had earned that position through skill and hard work, and Harlan could not have been prouder. That evening, as the sun set over the vineyard and the first barrels of new vintage began their long fermentation, Harlan found Sera in the cellar, checking the seals and making notes in her careful handwriting. "The first vintage of our new label," he said, coming to stand beside her. "How does it feel?" "Strange," Sera admitted. "Good strange. I never imagined I would be part of something like this, creating something that would last beyond the season." Harlan had been thinking about this moment for weeks, planning what he would say, how he would ask. But now, standing in the cool dimness of the cellar with Sera beside him, he realized there was no perfect script. There was only honesty and hope. "I want you to be more than part of it," he said quietly. "I want this to be ours, Sera. Not just the vineyard, but everything. A life together, a future together. I know it will not always be easy, I know there will be challenges, but I cannot imagine facing any of it without you." Sera set down her pen and turned to face him fully, her dark eyes searching his. "Are you asking what I think you are asking?" "Yes." Harlan pulled a small ring from his pocket, simple silver set with a dark garnet. "I am asking you to marry me, to be my wife, my partner, my family, to build something together that is stronger than prejudice or fear or anything else the world throws at us." Sera stared at the ring, and for a horrible moment Harlan thought she might refuse, might say it was too soon or too complicated. But then she looked up at him, and her eyes were bright with tears. "Yes," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, you stubborn, wonderful, impossible man. I will marry you." He slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, the dark stone catching the lamplight. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, long and deep, and felt her melt against him with a sigh of pure happiness. "We will have to have a small ceremony," Sera said when they finally pulled apart, both of them grinning like fools. "I doubt many priests would agree to marry a human and an orc." "Then we will find one who will," Harlan said firmly. "Or we will have a civil ceremony with the magistrate. Or we will just declare ourselves married and let anyone who objects come fight me about it." Sera laughed, that wonderful free sound that he had come to love. "You are going to make my life very interesting, are you not?" "I certainly plan to try." They married 6 weeks later, in a simple ceremony held in the vineyard itself, surrounded by friends and a few open-minded guild members who came to witness and celebrate. The local magistrate performed the ceremony, reading the traditional vows with dignity and respect, and when Harlan kissed his bride, the small gathering erupted in applause. They held the reception in the barn, tables laden with food and wine, and people danced to music from a small group of musicians Harlan had hired from town. It was not the grand society wedding that might have been expected for a successful vintner, but it was perfect, full of warmth and joy and genuine celebration. That night, lying in their bed in the main house, Sera curled against his side, Harlan felt a contentment deeper than anything he had ever known. They had fought for this, had faced down prejudice and fraud and public disapproval, and they had won. Not just the battle against Garrett Marston, but the bigger victory of building a life on their own terms. "You regret any of it?" Sera asked quietly, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. Harlan thought about the question seriously, because she deserved that. He thought about the lost business, the strained relationships with some guild members, the knowing glances and whispered comments that would probably follow them for years. "No," he said finally. "Not for a moment. You are worth all of it, Sera. You are worth everything." She kissed him then, soft and sweet, and whispered against his lips, "I love you, Harlan Becker." "I love you too," he said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were still people who disapproved of their marriage, who refused to do business with them, or made cruel comments when they thought Harlan and Sera could not hear. But there were also victories, small and large. The vineyard prospered, their wines gaining recognition beyond the region. Other vintners, seeing their success, began to hire orc workers, slowly breaking down the old prejudices. 2 years after their marriage, Sera discovered she was pregnant. The news filled Harlan with equal parts joy and terror, worried about the complications of a mixed-heritage child, about whether the world would be kind to someone who was part human and part orc. But when their son was born, healthy and squalling and perfect, Harlan held the tiny infant in his arms and felt only overwhelming love. They named him Finnick, and he had his mother's pointed ears and his father's dark curly hair, and he was beautiful in a way that took Harlan's breath away. Finnick grew strong and clever, learning to walk between the vineyard rows, learning to identify different grape varieties by the time he was 3. He was joined 2 years later by another son, Ethan, who had Sera's green-tinged skin and Harlan's quick smile. The boys became fixtures in the vineyard, helping with simple tasks, playing among the vines, growing up in a home full of love and hard work. On Finnick's 5th birthday, Harlan stood on the hill overlooking the vineyard, watching Sera teach their sons to identify when grapes were ready for harvest. The afternoon sun painted everything golden, and the vines were heavy with fruit, and he could hear the boys' laughter carrying on the breeze. 5 years since, he had found those forged documents on his gate. 5 years since he had kissed Sera in front of the entire guild and changed both their lives forever. It felt like a lifetime ago and like yesterday all at once. Sera climbed the hill to join him, leaving the boys to their exploration, and slipped her hand into his. Her wedding ring caught the light, the garnet as dark and beautiful as the day he had given it to her. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how it all started," Harlan said honestly. "About Garrett Marston and the forged seal and how angry I was that day." "Do you ever wonder what happened to him? After the tribunal, I heard he sold his vineyard and moved east, trying to rebuild his reputation somewhere people did not know about the scandal." Harlan shrugged. "I hope he learned something from it all, but honestly, I do not think about him much anymore. Too busy with other things," Sera said, smiling as Finnick called out in triumph, having found a perfectly ripe cluster. "Yes, too busy being happy." Harlan pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Too busy building a life with you." Below them, the vineyard stretched out in neat rows, the grapes nearly ready for harvest. In a few weeks, they would begin the process all over again, the endless cycle of growth and harvest and fermentation that was the heartbeat of their lives. It was hard work, and it would never stop being hard work, but it was also deeply satisfying, knowing they had built something lasting and good. That evening, after the boys were in bed and the house was quiet, Harlan and Sera sat on the porch, sharing a bottle of their award-winning red vintage and watching the stars come out. The air was cool and smelled of ripening grapes and earth, familiar and comforting. "I have been thinking," Sera said, swirling the wine in her glass, "about expanding, acquiring the Marston property now that it is for sale again." Harlan raised his eyebrows. "That is ambitious and expensive, but strategic. The Marston land borders ours to the north, and the soil quality is excellent. We could double our production, hire more workers, really establish ourselves as one of the premier vineyards in the region." "You have been planning this," Harlan said, grinning. "I have been considering options," Sera admitted. "We have proven ourselves, Harlan. We have built something strong and respected. Why not make it even stronger?" Harlan considered the idea, turning it over in his mind. It was risky, would require significant investment and work, but Sera was right that it made strategic sense. And there was a certain poetic justice in acquiring Garrett Marston's former property and making it part of their success. "All right," he said finally. "Let us look into it. Do some calculations, see if we can make the numbers work." Sera's face lit up with excitement and she leaned over to kiss him. "This is why I love you. You dream as big as I do." "You inspire me to," Harlan said honestly. "I was content running a small operation before you came along. You made me want more, want to build something that would last." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, sipping their wine and enjoying the peace of the evening. Down in the valley, lights from neighboring farms twinkled in the darkness, and somewhere in the distance, an owl called. "Do you remember that first morning?" Sera asked suddenly. "When you found the forged documents?" "I remember. I was bringing you tea, feeling ridiculously pleased with myself for remembering you liked mint. Then I saw those papers and wanted to burn down half the county in rage." Sera laughed softly. "You were so angry, but also so certain I was innocent without even asking. That meant more to me than you probably realize." "I knew you," Harlan said simply. "I had worked beside you for months. I knew your character, knew you would never do what those papers claimed. And honestly, I think I was already halfway in love with you by then, though I had not admitted it to myself yet." "Only halfway," Sera teased. "Well, the other half came when you refused to panic, when you immediately started thinking strategically about how to solve the problem. That is when I knew you were exactly the kind of person I wanted to spend my life with. Lucky for both of us, then, that Garrett Marston was terrible at forgery," Sera said. "That flawed seal was his undoing. No, his arrogance was his undoing. The seal was just the evidence." Harlan finished his wine and set the glass aside. "But I am grateful for it anyway, because it gave us the chance to prove everything in the most public way possible. No room for doubt, no lingering questions." Sera nestled closer to him, her head resting on his shoulder. "I never imagined my life would turn out like this. When I left home, I thought I would just find work somewhere, live quietly, maybe save enough money to buy a small piece of land eventually. I never dreamed I would have all this. A home, a family, a partner who loves me without reservation." "You deserve all of it," Harlan said fiercely. "You deserve every good thing, Sera, and I plan to spend the rest of my life making sure you have them." The conversation drifted to other topics then, to plans for the upcoming harvest, to Finnick's progress with his reading lessons, to whether they should plant a new variety of grape on the east slope. Ordinary domestic details, the comfortable rhythms of a shared life. But underneath it all, Harlan was aware of the extraordinary nature of what they had built. In a world that often saw differences as threats, they had created a space where love and partnership transcended old prejudices. They had faced down fraud and public scandal, had stood together against those who wanted to drive them apart, and they had emerged victorious. The harvest came in strong that year, the grapes bursting with sugar and flavor. Harlan and Sera worked alongside their seasonal crew. everyone moving with the efficient coordination of a well-practiced team. Finnick and Ethan helped where they could, carrying small baskets of grapes, learning the work that would one day be their inheritance. On the first day of the crush, Harlan and Sera stood together in the pressing room, watching the juice flow dark and rich into the waiting barrels. It was a moment they had shared countless times now, but it never lost its magic, the sense of participating in something ancient and vital. "To the vintage," Harlan said, raising a cup of fresh grape juice in toast. "To the vintage," Sera echoed, touching her cup to his. "And to the life we have built." They drank together, the sweet juice tasting of earth and sunlight and promise, and Harlan looked at his wife, his partner, his love, and felt complete. The road had not been easy, and it would not always be easy going forward, but they had proven they could face anything together. That was enough. That was everything. The years continued to roll forward like seasons through the vineyard. They did eventually acquire the Marston property, though it took careful negotiation and a significant loan. The expansion proved successful, their production doubling within 3 years, and Becker Vineyards became one of the most respected names in the region. More Orc families began settling in the area, drawn by the example Harlan and Sera had set, by the proof that it was possible to build a good life despite old prejudices. Some came to work in the vineyards, others established their own farms and businesses. The valley changed slowly but surely, becoming more diverse, more open. Finnick and Ethan grew tall and strong, both of them inheriting their parents' love for the land and skill with growing things. They learned winemaking from their father and vineyard management from their mother, and by the time they were teenagers, they were valuable partners in the family business. One evening, many years after that fateful day with the forged documents, Harlan and Sera stood together on the same hill overlooking the vineyard. They were older now, their hair touched with gray, their hands bearing the calluses and scars of decades of hard work. But they still stood close together, still reached for each other instinctively, the connection between them as strong as it had been from the beginning. "We built something good here," Sera said softly, looking out over the vineyards that stretched as far as they could see. "We did," Harlan agreed. "Something worth fighting for." Below them, lights were coming on in the house where Finnick and Ethan were preparing dinner. Soon they would be called down to eat, to share a meal and stories and laughter with their sons and the extended family of workers and friends who had become part of their lives. But for now, in the gathering twilight, Harlan and Sera stood together on the hill and simply enjoyed the peace of it all. The peace they had fought for, earned and built together, one season at a time. "I love you," Harlan said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after all these years. "I love you too," Sera replied, squeezing his hand gently. And as the stars began to emerge overhead and the scent of ripening grapes filled the air, they walked down the hill together toward home, toward family, toward the life they had created against all odds. A life built on truth and trust, and a kiss shared publicly before all the world, defiant and proud and full of hope. It was more than either of them had ever dreamed of finding, and it was, in every way that mattered, exactly enough.